All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Glad to be back.
Today, we're looking at something a little bit on the morbid side, maybe? I don't know. But super fascinating, and you guys wanted us to take a deep dive into this, so
Absolutely.
we're gonna look at cannibalism and its connection to serial killers.
Okay.
And you sent over a research article from the National Library of Medicine
Yes.
called An Investigation into the Association Between Cannibalism and Serial Killers. So
Fascinating read.
yeah, and then also a really cool article from the University of Northampton,
Yes.
a news article called Psychology Researcher Seeks to Answer What Makes a Serial Killer Turn to Cannibalism. And then, of course, what deep dive would be complete without excerpts from some Wikipedia articles?
Right.
We got human cannibalism, and we also have a list of incidents of cannibalism
Oh, wow.
that we're going to take a look at. And
Very
then
good.
last but not least, a news release from IC about the sentencing of Alexander Nathan Barter. And that article is titled Northeast Texas Man Who Solicited Murder, Necrophilia, and Cannibalism of a Minor on Dark Web Sentenced to Federal Prison.
Wow.
So
That's a lot.
we got a lot to cover today, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Good.
With that University of Northampton article, the thing that caught my eye right away was that Dr. Abby Morono
Yes.
worked with the FBI and examined over 80 years
That's right.
of data on serial killers. Can you imagine?
Oh, 80 years of data. That's a gold mine.
The stories in there.
It is, and it really speaks to the depth and breadth of her research.
Yeah,
To be able to tap into that kind of resource is incredible.
absolutely. And then, talking about, okay, so we know that cannibalism happens sometimes, but it's not always the same, right?
Not at all.
The NLM article talks about 3 main categories
Yes.
of cannibalism.
They do.
Ritual, survival, and pathological, right?
Exactly. Those are the 3 main categories.
So I think most people are familiar with at least the idea of survival cannibalism, like the Donner Party.
Right. A classic tragic example.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Desperate times can lead to desperate measures.
Yeah.
And that's often where survival cannibalism comes into play.
But ritual cannibalism is something that, I don't know, I hadn't really considered.
Yeah, it's not something that's widely discussed, but it has existed in various cultures throughout history.
Yeah, like the Wari tribe in Brazil.
Exactly. They believed that consuming the remains of their deceased helped to transfer the person's spirit.
So it wasn't about aggression or violence in that case.
No, not at all. The motivations were completely different from what we typically associate with cannibalism.
Right.
It was a spiritual practice rooted in their beliefs about the afterlife.
And then pathological cannibalism, now that's
Yeah.
what we're focusing on today, because
Well,
that's
yeah.
the kind that's associated with serial killers.
Exactly. And that's where the real mystery lies.
Yeah, and the NLM article defines a serial killer as someone who has killed 2 or more people on separate occasions,
That's right.
with a return to normal routines in between.
That's an important distinction
Yeah,
because it separates them from mass murderers or spree killers.
right.
There's a cooling off period, a return to normalcy that is characteristic of serial killers.
So even among serial killers, pathological cannibalism
Yes.
is extremely rare.
It is, thankfully.
It's not like every serial killer
Not at all.
does this.
It's often sensationalized in media and popular culture, but the reality is that it's a very uncommon phenomenon.
Which makes you wonder, why does it happen at all?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, and looking at these historical examples from Wikipedia
Yes.
is really interesting. I mean, did you know that cannibalism, both for survival and ritual,
Right.
was surprisingly prevalent throughout history?
It's a fascinating and often disturbing aspect of human history.
Yeah, like in ancient Rome during famines,
Yes, there are accounts of cannibalism during times of extreme hardship.
or the 4 people of New Guinea.
Yes, the 4 people and the Kuru outbreak. A tragic example of how ritual cannibalism can have devastating consequences.
Yeah, and their experience with Kuru actually led to a genetic resistance to prion diseases in their population.
That's right. It's a fascinating example of natural selection at work, although under horrific circumstances.
And then to think that even medicine used to involve cannibalism.
Really?
Yeah, ground-up mummies were sold as like a cure for all sorts of things.
Wow. I had no idea.
Like mummy powder.
Mummy powder. That's incredible. And a little bit creepy.
Yeah, I know.
It shows how beliefs about the power of human remains were woven into various aspects of life
Right.
and even in seemingly enlightened societies.
So we've established that cannibalism has existed
Yeah,
throughout history in different forms
it has.
and for various reasons, but let's get back to our main focus,
Okay.
which is this connection
Yeah.
between cannibalism and serial killers
In the modern era, yeah.
in the modern era.
It's important to distinguish between the historical context and the specific manifestation of cannibalism in individuals who engage in serial murder.
So how do we even begin to understand the motivations of someone who engages in these kind of extreme acts?
That's the fundamental challenge, isn't it? We're dealing with the darkest recesses of the human psyche,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of actions that often defy logic and rational explanation.
It seems almost impossible.
It certainly isn't easy, but that's what makes it so compelling, I suppose.
All right, so I'm ready to get into some cases,
Okay.
if you are.
Where do we begin?
Let's begin with Peter Stump, the werewolf of Bedburg.
Ah, yes. The Werewolf of Bedburg, a case that straddles the line between historical context and the emergence of what we might recognize as a serial killer profile.
Okay, werewolves.
Well, not literally, of course, but the accusations of lycanthropy, transforming into a wolf, were taken very seriously in 16th century Germany.
Yeah.
Stump, under torture, confessed to a series of horrific crimes, including murder and cannibalism.
But was he actually a werewolf?
Of course not. But his case highlights how easily fear and superstition can distort perceptions
Right.
and lead to the demonization of individuals.
So his confessions, which included graphic details of cannibalism, were likely influenced by the torture he endured.
It's highly probable, yes, but regardless of the veracity of his confessions, the Werewolf of Bedburg case reveals how cannibalism could be used to amplify the perception of someone as being monstrous and utterly evil.
It's a good reminder that even when discussing historical cases, we need to consider the social context
Absolutely.
and be wary of taking confessions at face value.
Precisely. The line between truth and fabrication can be incredibly blurry, especially when fear and societal pressure are involved.
But as we move into the modern era, we start to see cases that are less about superstition and more about
A psychology of the individual.
the psychology of the individual.
Exactly, and that's where someone like Albert Fish comes in.
Albert Fish. I mean, his name is pretty much synonymous with
Right.
the darker side of cannibalism.
He's a case study in the disturbing depths of human depravity, targeting children and meticulously documenting his crimes.
And what's really striking about his case
Yet is it?
is how matter-of-factly he talks about it.
It's chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
He describes cooking human flesh as if it were any other ingredient, using everyday language and familiar culinary techniques.
So unsettling.
It's that contrast between the mundane and the monstrous that makes it so difficult to process.
Does that tell us anything about his motivation?
That's the question that continues to fascinate and confound experts.
Yeah.
Was it purely sadistic? Was there a delusional belief system at play? We may never know for sure.
It seems like there's no easy answer.
Not with these cases, no.
So Albert Fish highlights the potential for sadism and delusion, and then we have Stephen Griffiths.
Ah, yes, the crossbow cannibal,
Crossbow cannibal.
who seemed to be driven by a desire for notoriety and a fascination with the dark side of history.
Yeah, it seemed like he wanted to be part of this.
He did. He meticulously planned and documented his crimes, much like Fish. But his motivations appear to stem from a macabre interest in serial killers and a desire to emulate their horrific acts.
It's almost like he wanted to become a part of the dark history he was so fascinated by.
It's a chilling thought, but it speaks to the complexity of these cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes the motivations are multifaceted, blending elements of sadism, delusion, and a warped sense of purpose.
And then bringing us right into the present day,
Right.
we have Alexander Nathan Barter.
From the ICE news release, yes. This one is particularly disturbing because it involves the dark web and the solicitation of crimes against a minor.
It really highlights the dark side of the internet.
It does. It underscores the dangers lurking in the darker corners of the digital world.
Thankfully, it was an undercover IC agent.
Yes, thank
So
you.
no actual harm came to a child.
But the intent was there, which is deeply troubling.
So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, exploring the history of cannibalism, the different types, even delved into a few specific cases.
Pretty good overview, I'd say.
But we still have much more to discuss.
Indeed, we've only just scratched the surface.
So join us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we're going to delve further into the psychology of these individuals
I'm looking forward to it.
and examine what, if anything, can be done to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
Absolutely. A crucial conversation to have.
All right, see you guys in part 2.
See you then.
Okay, so we've kind of laid the groundwork now. We've explored the history, we've looked at some cases.
Right, we've set the stage.
But I think now it's time to really try to, like, get into the heads of these guys, like, try to understand.
Yes, let's delve deeper into the psychology.
Yeah, the psychology behind pathological cannibalism.
The why behind the what.
Specifically as it relates to serial killers. And
Right, because that's the real enigma here.
this is where things get tricky, right? Like, how do you even begin to explain
Well, it's a challenge.
such extreme
A huge challenge.
behavior?
We're dealing with individuals who exist outside the boundaries of what we consider normal.
Yeah,
Human behavior. It's easy to just slap a label on them, evil monster, but
right.
that doesn't really get us anywhere.
It doesn't help us understand it.
It's a natural reaction. But you're right, it doesn't offer much in the way of understanding.
So how do we even approach this? How do we even begin to understand
It's a delicate balance.
their motivation?
We have to acknowledge the horror of their actions,
Right.
while simultaneously trying to comprehend
Yeah.
the factors that contributed to their behavior.
Without, like, minimize. I mean, these are horrific crimes.
Absolutely. We cannot minimize or excuse their actions in any way.
But I don't think there's just, like, a single explanation.
There isn't. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Fits every case.
Each individual is a product of their own unique experiences, genetics, psychological makeup. It's complex.
But are there some things that they have in common? Are there?
There are definitely some common threads, some patterns that emerge when we study these individuals.
Like what?
For example, many serial killers who engage in cannibalism exhibit a profound need for control,
Like they want to be the one in charge.
a desire to exert absolute dominance over their victims.
I mean, cannibalism, is that like the ultimate form of possession?
You could say that it's a way of completely obliterating the victim,
Right.
not just physically, but also symbolically.
So where does this need for control, where does that come from? Is that like,
Well, it's often rooted in a sense of powerlessness or insecurity
okay.
in other areas of their lives.
Right.
Many of these individuals have experienced trauma,
Oh, wow.
abuse, neglect in their childhoods, and this can lead to feelings of inadequacy.
So they try to overcompensate for that, like in the worst way?
It's a tragic cycle. The pain they've endured is projected outwards,
Yeah.
manifesting in horrific acts of violence and domination.
It's like they're trying to regain control.
You could see it that way, yes, trying to reclaim a sense of agency that was stolen from them.
And even, it's almost like they're trying to absorb the strength of their victim.
In some cases, yes. Cannibalism may be a way of trying to absorb the victim's strength, their vitality.
Oh, that's weird.
If they can somehow internalize what they perceive as lacking in themselves.
It's like a messed up form of envy.
Precisely. And this ties into another common thread,
Mm-hmm.
a profound sense of alienation, isolation.
They don't feel connected.
They feel disconnected from others,
Yeah.
unable to form meaningful relationships.
Right.
And this isolation can fuel their fantasies, their obsessions,
So they create this whole world in their head.
creating a warped internal world where their darkest impulses can thrive.
So it's all in their head. It's like their own reality.
In a sense, yes, their perception of the world and their place in it is fundamentally distorted.
And cannibalism, is that their way of like trying to connect with others in this weird way?
It's a perverse form of connection, yes. They're seeking intimacy
But
and control
in the worst way.
in a way that is ultimately destructive.
But there's got to be more to it than just control and connection, right?
There is.
Like, what about the sadism, the enjoying hurting other people,
Absolutely. The enjoyment of inflicting pain and suffering.
Right.
For some individuals, the act of cannibalism itself is a source of gratification,
So is that sadism? Like, is that always there?
a way to indulge their darkest impulses.
Or can it develop over time?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
In some cases, there's evidence of sadistic tendencies from a very young age, but in others,
Okay.
it seems to emerge as a result of trauma or as their crimes escalate.
So it's not like a set thing. It could be something that
It's not necessarily a fixed trait, no.
changes.
It can evolve, intensify over time.
Man, it's a lot to think about.
It is. It's disturbing. It's unsettling.
It is, but it's important that we try to understand it, right?
It
If we want to stop it from happening again, we can't just ignore it.
Knowledge is power, even when it comes to the most disturbing aspects of human behavior.
Right.
By shining a light on these dark corners, we can begin to identify warning signs.
So as we kind of delve deeper into these cases, like, what are some things that we should be looking for? Like
Okay, well,
clues to figure out why they would do something like this.
one key area to examine is the individual's background, their early experiences.
Okay.
Were there any signs of Trauma, abuse, neglect? Do they exhibit cruelty towards animals or other children?
So we're looking for, like, red flags.
Exactly. Early indicators of a propensity towards violence, a lack of empathy.
Yeah, okay. And what about their behavior, like, right before the crime?
That's crucial as well.
Like, are there any clues there?
Absolutely. How do they choose their victims? Was there a specific type or profile they targeted? Were there any elements of fantasy or ritual involved in the crimes?
So we're looking for patterns.
Exactly. Recurring themes or patterns that might reveal a deeper psychological motivation.
All right, well, I think it's time to revisit some of those cases
Yeah.
that we talked about earlier and kind of look at them through this.
Yes, let's examine them through this new lens
Take a new lens
of psychological understanding.
like Albert Fish.
A prime example of the complex interplay of control, sadism, and delusion.
I mean, his crimes were particularly horrific.
They were, even among serial killers. His crimes stand out.
But what's interesting about his case
What about it?
is all the stuff that he left behind, like the letters, the confessions, the drawings.
Yes, that's what makes his case so fascinating from a psychological perspective.
So what does that tell us? Like, why the cannibalism?
Well, there's a clear element of sadism there.
Okay.
He seemed to derive pleasure from inflicting pain and suffering.
And like you said, he talked about cooking and eating human flesh like it was nothing.
Yes, with a chilling detachment, almost like he was following a recipe.
Like it was normal.
That's what makes it so disturbing. He seemed to compartmentalize his actions, separating them from any sense of morality or human connection.
So he created this whole other reality
It's like he constructed a separate reality in his mind,
where it was okay.
a world where his horrific acts were not only acceptable, but also a source of personal satisfaction.
So cannibalism for him was like a lot of different things. It was like
For Fish, cannibalism likely served multiple purposes.
control,
Control, yes.
a sadism,
Indulging his sadistic impulses.
and maybe even something, deeper.
And perhaps even some twisted form of spiritual or sexual gratification.
Man, the human mind is a
It's a strange and wonderful thing,
scary place.
but also capable of unimaginable darkness.
And then we have Stephen Griffiths, the crossbow cannibal.
Yes, Griffiths offers a different perspective.
Yeah.
Seems to be driven less by sadism or delusion,
Right.
and more by a fascination with violence and a desire for notoriety.
He was like a fan of serial killers.
He was. He studied their crimes, their methodologies, with an almost academic interest.
Like he wanted to be one of them.
It's as if he was trying to emulate those he idolized,
To be famous.
to become part of the dark legacy of serial killing.
So for him, cannibalism was like his claim to fame.
For Griffiths, cannibalism was a way to elevate his status,
To set himself apart.
to make his crimes even more shocking and memorable.
Wow, that's...
A calculated act designed to secure his place in the annals of criminal history.
I mean, it makes you think about, like, the media
It does.
and how it portrays these things.
the role that media and popular culture can play in shaping the motivations of these individuals.
It's like, are we giving them ideas?
We live in a world saturated with images and stories of violence.
Yeah.
And for some individuals, those images can become a source of fascination, even inspiration.
I mean, it's not about, like, banning stuff,
No, it's not about censorship.
but we need to be aware of.
It's about being mindful of the messages we're sending,
Yeah.
promoting responsible storytelling,
Like, are we glorifying this stuff
recognizing the power of narrative,
when we talk about it?
the way stories can shape our perceptions and influence our behavior.
It's a big responsibility.
It is, and it extends beyond media producers to all of us.
Like, we all have a responsibility.
We need to be thoughtful about the language we use, the images we share, the values we promote.
Let's not make it seem cool.
We need to create a culture of empathy where violence is not glorified
Yeah.
or sensationalized, but rather understood
Yeah.
and addressed as a serious societal problem.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground here in part 2. We talked about
Yeah.
control, sadism, delusion, trauma, isolation. I mean, it's a lot.
The complex web of motivations.
But we still have a lot more to discuss, so
Indeed we do.
man, it's heavy stuff.
It is. It's important to acknowledge the weight of what we're discussing.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this, I mean, throughout this whole deep dive. Like, how do we balance our fascination with this, these dark topics
Right.
with the need to respect the victims?
It's a question that comes up often.
Yeah.
I think it's possible to be both curious about the darker aspects of human behavior
Yeah.
and deeply empathetic
Yeah.
towards those who've been affected by it.
So it's not like we should just ignore it.
No, I don't think it's about shying away.
Yeah.
It's about approaching it with responsibility.
To learn.
To learn from these tragedies,
Yeah.
understand how they happen,
Yeah.
and to explore what we can do
To try to stop it from happening again.
to prevent similar atrocity
Right, and that starts with,
from occurring in the future,
yeah,
understanding human behavior.
understanding that there's not one single reason why somebody would do this.
Exactly. There's no single explanation, no easy answer.
Yeah, we've talked about control,
We have?
sadism, delusion, trauma, isolation. I mean, there's
It's a very tangled web of motivations.
so many different things.
And those motivations often intertwine. They reinforce each other,
Yeah.
creating this complex psychological landscape that can be very difficult to decipher.
Which is why research like Dr. Morono's is so important, right?
Absolutely. Examining data from a wide range of cases.
So we can see if there are any patterns.
Yes. To identify patterns, understand risk factors,
Yeah.
and potentially develop strategies for intervention.
But every case is different too.
Right, exactly. Every individual is different.
It's not like we can just,
We can't simply apply a one-size-fits-all approach
yeah, come up with a formula.
to understanding or preventing these crimes.
So we need data, but we also need to look at the individual.
It's about combining data-driven insights
Right.
with a nuanced understanding of individual circumstances.
It's a lot, but I think it's important, right?
It is. It's a challenging task,
Yeah.
but absolutely necessary if we want to make meaningful progress in addressing this issue.
And it's not just law enforcement either. It's not just the FBI.
It's not beyond that.
It's got to be a societal change, right?
Absolutely. We need to create a culture that fosters empathy, addresses issues like mental health and trauma, provides support for those who are struggling.
They need to help people.
It's about creating a world where individuals feel connected,
Yeah,
valued, and empowered to seek help when they need it.
I like that.
A world where violence in all its forms is less likely to take root.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about media, and how that can influence these guys.
It's an important consideration.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Of course, we live in a world saturated with images,
Right.
stories of violence, and it would be naive to think that this doesn't have an impact
Right.
on some individuals, especially those who are already vulnerable or predisposed to aggression.
So we have to be careful
We need to be mindful
about what we're showing.
of the messages we're sending,
Not glorifying violence.
promoting responsible storytelling,
Yeah.
recognizing that narratives can shape our perceptions,
Right.
influence our behavior.
And that's on everybody.
It's a responsibility we all share.
Not just the news, not just Hollywood.
We need to be thoughtful about the language we use,
Yeah.
the images we share, the values we promote.
Okay, so I think that about wraps up our deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot of things right now.
It's been a heavy journey,
Fascination, horror, sadness. I mean, it's...
a roller coaster of emotions.
But I also feel like I've learned a lot,
Me too.
and I want to do something.
Knowledge is power,
Yeah.
even when it's uncomfortable.
So we've talked about the history of cannibalism,
We have
the psychology of serial killers, the role of media. I mean,
a lot of ground covered,
it's a lot.
but important ground.
Hopefully this will get some conversations started.
I hope so.
Get people thinking about this stuff.
And maybe even inspire some action
Yeah.
to prevent violence, to promote empathy.
So that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay compassionate.